I'm no good at taking good advice, and I'm self-careless, so don't tell me twice that lately I've been so stuck in my head that I forget just about everything my therapist said. Maybe I'm self-helpless.
Hey everyone, welcome to Self-Helpless. I'm Delanie Fischer, and today I'm chatting with Dr. Catie Cuan, who is an engineer and choreo-roboticist, and we are talking about AI, robotics, where all of these advancements may be heading, and what that could mean for us when it comes to jobs, the environment, human health, our creativity. She gives great insights about new careers that are on the rise. We talk about rethinking how machines sound and move and the impact they can have in places like hospitals and more. I also ask questions like, what if a robot becomes conscious or sentient? Is that even possible? And if so, what the heck would that mean for us? And just a heads up, Catie shares about an app that she created that I asked a couple questions about. And I just want to say she is not a sponsor. Her app is not a sponsor. Catie or her company is not paying to have her on the podcast. I'm just genuinely curious about everything that we discussed today. So just wanted to make that clear. And I just feel like a little bit smarter after this conversation chatting with Catie. You know, I feel like I have one more divot in my brain with some new knowledge. It was all just really, really interesting. Hope you enjoy it. Here is my conversation with Dr. Catie Cuan. How has your background in dance influenced the way that you design or interact with robotic systems? And what can movement teach us about human AI collaboration?
My mission is to make nascent technologies like AI and robotics more humanistic, whimsical, and widely accessible. And I do that through business, research, and art. And my primary artistic background before I moved into becoming a founder and a CEO and getting my PhD was that I was a professional dancer in New York City. And I love when everyone says to me, "Oh, engineering is so hard. Getting a PhD in engineering is so hard." And I say, "Yeah, standing in a leotard with 400 other women is really hard too."
Yeah.
So we have lots of degrees of difficulty in different fields that people always bring to the table. But in all seriousness, my dance background, it taught me that choreographers and dancers are real experts at making meaning out of movement.
Mm.
And the main difference between a robot and a computer is that a robot moves. That really is the thing. Robot has a computer in it, but the thing that makes it distinctive is that it moves around the world. And when you take a robot out of a research lab, out of a factory, out of a company setting, and you put it in these everyday spaces like homes, offices, hospitals, sidewalks, etc., what is it doing? It's moving and interacting with people. And one of the first ways that humans experience the robot is through its movement, which means that you need to hire a whole bunch of choreographers to reconcile some of that tension and ambiguity that arises when you introduce a robot into a new space. Just like when computers moved out of the research lab and the factory and into all of our pockets and on our tabletops, you needed all of these other fields like linguistics, semiotics, psychology. That's where human computer interaction came from, which is
Mm.
actually where the Google founders were getting their PhDs, was in the human computer interaction group at Stanford. And so it's happened before where a technology is sequestered for a long time, then it becomes ubiquitous. And when that happens, all of these other subfields need to contribute to making that technology viable for a large array of people. And that's exactly what needs to happen right now with robotics and dance. So I think on a personal level, as a dancer, discipline, fortitude, general movement understanding, a desire to create and build. Those are the things that happened for me as an individual. In a more philosophical level, there's so much overlap between robots and computers becoming more ubiquitous, needing a lot of these other fields, and then being able to draw upon the expertise from movement and dance to make robots not only more friendly and empowering for humans to be around, but also safe.
Your career is probably the most niche thing that I've heard. I mean, choreography and robotics and combining those, that is just so cool. But why is it important to make robotics more, I guess, humanistic or non-threatening? Like, will it make us, more adaptable or more open to them being around?
Well, thank you so much, Delanie. I have to say, at the time, I always tell everyone like this was a stochastic process. Like I did not know that me being a dancer was going to lead me to getting a PhD in robotics, which it's not like you plan those things, right? I had all
Yeah.
these sets of these different interests, and I met some really extraordinary people like Amy Leviers, who was investigating similar ideas as a professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and Sydney Skybetter, who was a mentor who was thinking about choreographic interfaces. So I had a community of people who were investigating this melange of what does it mean to have our bodies be legible to all of these new technologies through cameras and gesture and depth cameras especially. So I think and there's a few people who do what I do right now, but there will be tens of thousands of people who do what I do in the future. It will
Wow.
be, just like we didn't have software engineers in the 1930s, now we have millions of them.
Right.
We are going to see those new jobs show up. So to your question about why is it important, I use the word humanistic, which I guess could also be rephrased as human-centered, because often as engineers, we are so fascinated by what the technology can do and how awesome and performant it can be. Whereas as a person who's interested in humans, creativity, and the arts, I'm much more interested in what can the technology unlock for me to express, to experience, to feel, and also to extend, right? This is the thing that makes us distinctive as a species is our relationships to our tools. We've been using tools for 2.6 million years, way back to our stone tools. And so
Yeah.
the,
Wow.
the robots that we have now, how can we make them human centered so that everyone who is, whether you're a 4-year-old or 76 like my dad, you feel empowered to use a robot. And that's important because there's going to be billions of robots in our lifetimes. I really truly believe that. It only took 13 years for a billion iPhones to start being used on Earth.
Ooh,
So you can
good point.
imagine, yeah, in the
Jeez.
next several decades, knock on wood, hopefully we're also lucky. In the next several decades, you have an opportunity for robots to show up in all of these different spaces. What do we want that to look and feel like? For me, it's about creating interfaces that are intuitive and also fun and inspiring. I think we wind up in this Wall-E, dystopian lack of empowerment space pretty easily when it comes to our tools, because those are the kinds of stories that we see. Whereas what would it be like if you had a robot that could encourage you to dance or would help you get up safely on your feet and navigate a busy space? And one of the things that could unlock was for you to have more mobility so that you could live a longer life. And the last thing I'll say on that is we have huge demographic shifts right now worldwide, especially in the United States. I think the birth rate is something like 1.69 per 2 people, which the thing that US used to make up for with such a low birth rate was very high immigration. Who knows where that's going to go?
Right.
And there's other countries like South Korea where I think the birth rate is 0.8 for 2 people. And so you're going to have a much older population without as many young people to help take care of them. And typically the 2 drivers of increases in GDP are more people, more population growth, or productivity gains. So if we're not going to see this big population growth, we need productivity gains. Where is that productivity going to come from, especially when it needs to be labor-based productivity? And that's where I think AI and robots have a huge role to play.
So fascinating. Do you have a favorite example from your work of how you witnessed a robotic movement of some kind impact a human's emotions or experience, whether it be negative or positive?
A big reason I became a roboticist was because my dad got really sick in 2014. He had a stroke, and he's fine now actually, but English is his 3rd language. He was in the hospital and he was surrounded by all of these machines, and he was really scared. And every time they would make noise or something would jump around, I would see him react emotionally to that experience, which when you're sick and your priority is to get better, you don't want to be in a high stress or high anxiety state as a result of the technology that is supposed to help you get better.
Right. Oh my
And
gosh.
it was such an obvious example for me of where my expertise as an artist, which I would broadly describe as being able to change emotion, would be applicable to a technology in a setting where people are super vulnerable. And that was one of the first aha moments for me of like, wow, I, as an artist, can do things that are not only on stages or for audiences, but out in the world for people like my dad who wouldn't necessarily engage with these tools otherwise. I think that was a big one. And then as a potential, as a light at the end of the tunnel of, oh, I could see a world in which things could be a little bit different. And then when I became the artist in residence at Everyday Robots, which was the big machine learning and robotics moonshot at Google X for many years, we had no idea what I was going to work on. And the team had built these 200 robots. We call them mobile manipulators. So it's something that can move around by itself, fully autonomous, and then also use an arm, to manipulate its environment. I worked on a variety of things at Everyday Robots, but one of the things we did was we sonified the whole robot. So every time a part of the robot moved, it would trigger a sound. And we worked with this amazing composer named Peter Van Straten so that the whole robot became an orchestra, a symphony. And so if it moved its shoulder, you would hear the strings. And when it opened it and closed its gripper, you would hear bells. And when it moved its head, you'd hear these beautiful trumpets. And these sounds could be triggered at any time because the robot could move any of its joints at any time. And it was literally sorting trash, like actually sorting trash and playing this music mode software. And it was next to this engineer's desk, but he sent me an email that was like, I was just moved to tears watching this robot sort trash while it was playing music mode, because I never thought a technology could be that beautiful or evocative. It was a simple, from a technical standpoint, a fairly simple intervention. It took us a long time artistically to figure out exactly what that mapping was going to be. And Peter worked on so many different versions of the sounds that we were going to use. But in the end, it wound up completely transforming the robot from this passive tool to something that brought beauty into the environment. And that was not the only one of those emails that I wound up getting. I got a bunch about how much this one intervention, we wound up doing a variety of projects, but this one intervention had shifted people's experience. And I thought, well, if we can do that for this robot, what else could we do for all of the other robots?
Oh my gosh. What an incredible perspective. I mean, what you shared about your dad, I would never even think about that. How important the human interaction with a robot in a hospital setting could be for somebody's health, and the inventions that you can't even think could come to fruition. I think it's really fascinating, the integration of art and tech, because at least from an outsider, I mean, I was a religious studies major in college and then I got into comedy. I am not a tech person. I just learned ChatGPT recently. And so from an outside perspective, I would think that those fields are very separate. Art is over here, tech is over here. You got right brain and left brain. You mentioned the population, labor force, that piece of this puzzle. So how might AI driven automation, robotics, et cetera, reshape global labor markets? What sectors are most at risk, which are most likely to benefit? Do you foresee a happy medium here? Like, are these robots going to be just filling gaps that we need? Are they taking jobs away from people? What is your perspective on all that?
I think it's a very complex discussion right now. It's both complex and simple, right? I think there's so much fear about people losing their jobs or being replaced by AI, and I want to acknowledge that fear is very real for people. And I think some of it, at least in the discussions that I've had, stems from feeling a lack of agency, or feeling that many of the institutions that have historically been in charge of our welfare and well-being potentially don't take care of us the way that they used to. And I think there's an overall foreboding and also a little bit of malaise and apathy that people have, because they've observed this kind of massive inequality that's emerged from certain people and certain groups being able to benefit so much from the widespread usage of these technologies. So I think it's a hyper complex discussion, and there's some of it that happens in the political social layer, some of it that's psychological and kind of your own perception of where the world is, and then some of it which is the logistics of what's really happening on the ground. There are a lot of researchers who are doing a tremendous amount of work in this area, and I've read a fair amount about it, and then I have a perspective that comes from my own experience. I think folks like James Manika, who's the SVP of Technology and Society at Alphabet, Eric, I'm going to butcher his last name. I think it's Brynjolfsson, is a professor in human-centered AI at Stanford, came over from MIT. They're really deeply looking at this kind of future of work question. This is what I can share from my experience. So first of all, I've been working with robots for a long time now. They have a lot of limitations. It is extraordinary how much humans can do. I mean, we are facile, we're adaptable, we have all of these beautiful degrees of freedom in our body. We can perceive the environment, we can move quickly, we can move slowly, and we've built all these spaces for ourselves. So we need to kind of uplift and glorify just how extraordinary humans are. I mean, think about all the things that you had to do today. You probably made a coffee and opened a door and moved a chair around, and maybe you took out your trash, and like these kinds of things are super hard for today's robots to do. They are actually incredibly complex. None of those things are end-to-end solved problems that robots can do autonomously 100% of the time in every environment. If you go to Europe and you're walking in, you are not going to have a problem, walking into your hotel room and figuring out how to use the coffee machine. Because chances are it's fairly similar to the ones you've seen before. That would still be a huge challenge for a robot who's never seen a door like that before, or a different kind of coffee machine. So as a roboticist, I want to underscore, one, how amazing humans are, and two, that robots today still have a ton of limitations. Right. Some of those are due to cost. Some of it is because we don't have algorithms that have solved all these problems yet. Some of it is computing and a data problem. So I want to underscore that. And then the second thing is that jobs are cyclical. We are always entrenched in new jobs. As I mentioned, software engineers, we didn't have software engineers 100 years ago. Now we have millions of them. When you build a billion robots, you need a whole lot of people to know how to fix those robots. I would always say at Everyday Robots at Google, we had robot veterinarians. It's really hard to be a robot veterinarian if you've never invented a robot. Really hard to be a mechanic if you've never invented a car. So every time we introduce a new technology into the world, there is disruption, and it means that a lot of jobs are created and other jobs don't exist in the same capacity. The most of the data that I've read is that we are moving towards labor augmentation as opposed to labor replacement. And I think Andrew Ng, who's one of the godfathers of deep learning, talks about we won't replace, in many cases, jobs end to end, but we will replace tasks. So for example, if you are a pizza delivery person, you need to look at the phone app and see what time you need to go to the restaurant. You need to navigate directions. You then need to walk to the front door. You need to interact with a human being. Like, a robot will likely not do all the end-to-end pieces of that task. It might do a part of it, right? So this is where he speaks about replacing tasks as opposed to wholesale replacing jobs. And then the third thing I think that becomes very insidious is the narrative that we tell about these things. And if we immediately throw your hands up in the air and say, oh, I have no part of this, fatalism, everything's coming from my job, I'm screwed, you have effectively opted yourself out of what is a very important conversation about your well-being and your future. And so I encourage everyone I speak to, whether it's a middle schooler, a grad student, or people who are looking to make a career change, or even generally curious about this, that if you're curious and you have an interest, explore how your unique skills have a role to play in this new world. Because if the only narrative is, I'm stuck, I'm lost, I'm losing, you throw your hands up in the air and you back off, someone benefits from that fear. Someone benefits from you taking yourself out of the discussion. So whether you're interested in fashion and you want to learn about 3D printing garments and how autonomous robots that have 3D printers or 3D printed material alongside them can change the fashion industry, amazing. If you have an interest in baseball and you're curious about how predictive analytics are going to change the way that you choose players, that's a way for you to learn about robots and AI, where that opacity doesn't scare you, but it's an invitation for you to play a part.
Great points. I think there's just this knee-jerk reaction that new equals scary, different equals scary. And I'm sure people were terrified about the internet when it was first coming around, right? Or social media. And we've seen the internet has done great things. It's done terrible things. It's done mundane things. It seems like the person using it is the biggest factor. I was actually at a restaurant recently and, ordering on your phone has become more common where you scan the code, you order yourself, somebody brings out the food. And I was surprised to see just as many servers working there as before they had implemented this tool, but the customer experience had been elevated a little bit. I noticed
Mhm.
that the waters had mint and limes in them. That makes sense, I guess, because tasks are being taken care of and then they can kind of upgrade things in other areas, which makes sense of this kind of replacing tasks versus people. Let's maybe try to lean into people's fears for a second and do some like a thought experiment. Let's say, it's decades from now and we have cracked a lot of codes with robots and they are doing very humanistic things like they're able to do, make the coffee, take the trash out, that kind of a thing. Could our trust or even admiration of them be used against us in some way? Like, are we going to end up in some kind of Terminator type situation, or would it be much more insidious than that if things were to go wrong or malfunction or they're programmed for violence or something? I mean, what could you maybe share with us about that huge fear that people have?
I think one of my favorite thinkers in the AI space is Yuval Noah Harari, right? It's like a fantastic historian, thinker, and then another person who's a very dear friend of mine is Jaron Lanier. And Yuval has this thing. I went to a talk that he gave, moderated by Nicholas Thompson, who was then the editor in chief of Wired and is now the CEO of The Atlantic. And then Yuval was in conversation with Fei Li, who is, a real godmother of AI and a professor at Stanford, and now has her own company. And Yuval was saying that one of the best things that you can do is to know yourself. It's truly to know yourself better than algorithms know you, to
Mm.
know the things that are your triggers, the things that excite you, the things that allow you to be manipulated. And the way that he was doing it was he spends about a month a year at an ashram, I think, or just meditating. So he goes completely offline, and also is a prolific reader, and so was inviting everyone who is in this discussion to truly, deeply interrogate and investigate the way that you are, because to know yourself better than a company knows you is to take that power back and to decide what you will and won't allow to nudge you. And I think that concept is generally valuable, not just with AI, but for things like robots too.
Mm.
If you have a robot that's helping you do a task in your space, and maybe you anthropomorphize it a little bit because you're a kind person. I think it would be strange if you had a robot in your home that was helping you do things like put on your shoes, which is a big challenge for a lot of older people, or make
Mm.
sure that you were still hydrated, and you were mean to it. I mean, that would be sort of an indication of some of your own biases or morals. I think so many of these technologies really just hold a mirror up to the person that's using them. And so being, you don't have to treat the thing like your girlfriend, but kind of being kind seems to be like a universal human benefit, whether you're being kind to your cat or your plant or the robot that's inside of your space. I think that's a really important one. And then, to walk down this fear plank a little bit. Again, I go back to, as a roboticist, robots are super limited right now, and there's really just so little that they can do. But I think what it comes down to again is empowering people to know how these things work and then not over glorifying them, being able to say, these are some of the benefits, these are some of the shortcomings, and we don't need to hold up rose colored glasses and pretend like it's any more complicated than it is. Like, it's a machine that's doing very good, very fast matrix algebra and statistics, and like, that's nice. And now it means that helpful things can happen in our environment. It does not mean that there's some more that we need to ascribe to it than what's there.
I guess people are worried that somebody in power who's, immensely corrupt could really use this for the wrong reasons. But I can't we just look at anything from our past and our history? But you did
Mm.
mention, people's own biases and stuff when they're interacting with a robot, since humans are very flawed and we're the ones interacting with them, programming AI, whatever it is. Do we run the risk of kind of indoctrinating these machines or intelligences into our biases or teaching them to uphold systems that we're actively trying to reform, is that a concern of any kind?
So Jaren's this really amazing, prolific technologist, philosopher, etc. He's like one of the co-inventors of virtual reality. And he says this thing where everyone's always talking about like, oh, well, these machines are passing the Turing test. You have people can't tell the difference between whether it's ChatGPT responding or a human being, and like, oh, now we've passed the threshold of no return, and like, what's going to happen when robots can do the same and like make omelets that are just as good as human omelets? And Jaren sort of points that out as a flawed paradigm, because in the Turing test, you have one person who's the judge, and then you have some kind of artificial intelligence robot, etc., machine, let's just call it over here, and then another person over here. And so the judge is trying to determine if some whatever, whether that's language that comes back or an omelet, was made by that human or by that machine. And Jaren goes, here's the problem with the Turing test. There is a 1/3 likelihood that the machine has become hyper intelligent or hyper capable. But there's a 2/3 likelihood that one of the humans has become a moron, or that like one of the humans has made a false judgment, right? Or has created a flaw or an error. And I think that conceptually is very powerful, because it goes back to this question for me of like, are you knowing yourself? Are you being responsible? Are you taking on, if you want to go deep down the YouTube or social media or whatever rabbit hole and throw in as many conspiracy theories as you can possibly find, okay, was that the algorithm being brilliant, or was it you allowing yourself to be manipulated? I think that's the assertion that he's making. But to your question about these machines kind of becoming hyper intelligent, or this like doomsday scenario, so one of my dear friends, Zoe Hitzig, who's a poet and an economist, works at a large AI company, and has, I think she's sort of referencing someone else's philosophical paradigm about, is it enough to be able to like shove a giant moral compass into an AI system and say, in these scenarios, you respond like this, which is nice. In these scenarios, you don't respond like that, which is cruel. These are the kinds of words to stay away from. Like, is that enough? Or if we look at our own learning as people, what are the things that presumably make you and I accountable to one another? Part of it's shame. The feeling of, oh, if I am cruel, or I steal from this person, or someone finds out about it, or I'm caught, there are going to be real societal repercussions to me taking that action.
Right.
And that is something that has evolved over millions of years, because we live in these intersocial groups. Like, humans are very tied up with one another, because if you or I were trying to do everything by ourselves, we wouldn't do very well. You'd have to be responsible all day for hunting and making power and finding a way to clothe yourself. But like, because we rely on each other, we have found a way to do all of those things more efficiently. And it's also because we've learned this accountability that we have to other people. Machines don't have to go through that process right now of learning that, right? Of experiencing what it's like when you're a kid and you steal from someone, and then people are like, you really shouldn't do that. And
Right.
these things get, and then the second point that she makes is, yes, we're shoving these moral compasses into AI systems. We as humans, we also, not only do we experience shame and embarrassment, but we acquire these over long periods of learning, right? So your moral compass when you're 4 is probably different than when you're 10, which is probably different than when you're 19, which is probably different than you're 35. And so you keep growing. And if you throw everything into an AI just from the jump, are you giving it that learning horizon to actually try and fail, right? And so I think it actually becomes an interesting discussion around cognition and what does it mean to truly learn and internalize something, versus simply saying, here's a rules-based moral architecture, versus these are the kinds of structures that allow you or I or whoever else might want to consider themselves to be a kind, responsible adult to learn those types of accountability equations over time.
So interesting. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned shame and how that is kind of an operating system for us. And so, if we're looking at the future of AI or robotics, do you think it could be possible for some kind of intelligence to feel or experience human emotion or at least understand it? And then, where does the discussion of consciousness and sentience, could it be potentially unethical to shut one of these machines down at some point or reboot them? Where in your space and your expertise does consciousness begin and end?
So one of my former colleague, Hans-Peter Brandmo, who was in charge of all of everyday robots at Google X, used to say this thing where it's like consciousness will not be the same as human consciousness. I think
Right.
Thomas Nagel, who's a philosopher, has been saying this for quite a long time. He has this famous essay, "What is it like to be a bat?" And it's a bat is conscious, and we have no idea what bat consciousness is. You and I will never know what
Right.
bat consciousness is because we will never. I mean, right now we're not bats,
Right. Right.
so we don't know what it's like to be a bat and to know what that consciousness enables. How their sensorial experience of the world impacts their consciousness, even what a bat thought is like. We could hook them
Yeah.
up to fMRIs and all these nice electrical systems to see what their brainwaves would look like, but that would tell you nothing viscerally about what it means to be a bat.
Right.
The same thing happens with robots. And then, I'm not a kind of consciousness expert. I do love, though, Sam Harris has this way of speaking about consciousness where it's like thoughts show up. Like, if you ask me right now what my favorite movie was, some movie would simply appear. I wouldn't even necessarily choose it. Like, it would simply appear in consciousness. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I think that's my favorite movie. Right.
Mm.
Which could be a combination of what I ate today, these like physical and material properties of how I'm thinking and what I'm feeling. And what is, you and I talked about Terminator references. I'm like, okay, maybe the favorite movie that pops up today is going to be something sci-fi related. Or maybe it will be a construction of 10 different choices of favorite movies I've always had. And so when you think about consciousness that way, which is like these thoughts are simply emerging, why couldn't something similar happen for robots or with AIs where a thought would emerge?
Right.
And it's unclear exactly why that thought emerges, but it does. And in our common definition, like, why wouldn't we call that consciousness? And this is kind of Hans Peter's assertion. And so much like we don't know what bat consciousness is, we might not know what robot consciousness is. And, there's then, of course, a variety of arguments arise around, well, how do you navigate that? Like, if you have a robot that's, quote, sentient, and you're asking it to do something it, quote, doesn't want to do, what does that power hierarchy look like? With other human beings, it's because we make agreements, we have negotiations. We say, oh, please, can you come babysit my kids? This is my proposal for an hourly rate. And they say they want to charge more or less. And like, you have these two agential beings that are coming to a common agreement. I don't know if that's a way that we would structure our relationships with robots in the future. But I do think there's an interesting question, which is, if robot consciousness did emerge, would we even know it? What would it look like that would be fundamentally different than human consciousness?
Yeah.
And why would it emerge in a robot as opposed to emerging in an electric vehicle or something? And I think it's because the thing that is still questionable is, like, we don't have full visibility into how many of these different AI systems, when you have literally like billions, if not trillions of weights and just these enormous, enormous models, it's hard to come up with predictive behavior or full visibility. And that's where this kind of legibility, whole domain in AI is curious, like explainability, basically.
Yeah.
And if you also have outcomes that are not consistent, they're non-deterministic, what is nudging those outcomes every single time? We don't know. Would I call that consciousness right now? Probably not. I might just call it randomness. Like, if I blow on a sunflower and the petals fly in one direction versus a different direction, all else is held equal, it's some of like the natural chaos of the universe. I think it's intriguing to think about as a like downstream, philosophical experiment. What that means for me, though, in the short term is I want to spend my time working on problems that make people's lives better.
Yeah.
And I want to spend my time building things, companies right now and artwork and research with these nascent tools that invite more people to come to the table and be excited about them. And I would rather do that than be like, oh yeah, it's all over, baby. Like that's just the kind of that's the easy route to go down. And
Yeah.
I've always say I think it's much more subversive for robots to be beautiful and inviting than it is for them to be scary.
Mm. Your goal is to, you're hoping the advancement will help people, and I'm sure the world at large, right? And so, are you finding that a lot of the interest in the advancement of robotics and AI, do you find it's like across the board, whether it's support and funding across all industries? Is the hope that AI is going to be able to protect and preserve the environment and save people and save animals and kind of be like the greatest humanitarian, conservationist, animal welfare advocate we've ever seen, right? Or are you finding that a lot of the interest right now is, increasing productivity and then, therefore it's kind of like lining corporations' pockets because we're able to make more money faster or whatever? Where is it currently, do you think, the support or funding?
I think climate change is an existential problem. I mean, like in the most fundamental way possible. And I think that it's become pretty clear to me that we are going to have to innovate ourselves out of this problem as opposed to creating pacts or political treaties and commitments. I think it's hard to incentivize politicians and companies to do things that will be adverse to what their fundamental goals are, which are either to be reelected and hold on to power or make money in a return for their shareholders. So I think and then on the individual level, I think it's hard to force people to change their behavior. I mean, getting people, and I don't want to be pessimistic about that. I think it's more that if you look at what are some of the fundamental base desires for each of these kinds of institutions, whether it's individuals, governments, or companies, it can be challenging, right?
Yeah.
To incentivize certain sets of behaviors that would nudge us towards a more optimistic climate outcome. So I think I have come as an individual to believe that we are going to have to innovate our way out of a lot of these big issues, which are things like carbon sequestration, cleaning up the oceans, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, finding cleaner energy sources, reducing food waste, the list goes on. And I think that one colleague and friend who I think is working with AI in a really interesting way is this woman, Kim Palese, who's a prolific entrepreneur. And she has a company where she's using AI to bring stakeholders together just on a city and government level. So if you have, let's say you want to build a new building, and you've got city council members with their constituent interests, and you have contractors, and you have environmental board review, and you have all of these different stakeholders. She's using AI to say, can we come up with a solution or a proposal that will work for many of them that potentially we might not be able to generate ourselves because there literally are so many different competing interests.
Right.
I think that's an amazing application of AI. And you could imagine something like that happening for carbon credits. So you say, these are all these different countries with their varying emission levels. These are some of the different companies that are responsible for it. How could we create a structure, or what kinds of proposals could we offer that would do a kind of cap and trade that would be most optimal for all these various groups? Like, that's a big challenging problem. That probably would have taken a bunch of consultants a long time to figure out. Whereas I think with a lot of today's models, it won't churn out a proposal that you probably want to use tomorrow, but it would spark something where it would allow you to see that problem in a potentially new way. And besides the fact that people are doing a lot of fundamental science breakthroughs like AlphaFold, coming up, figuring out how proteins fold, that work over at DeepMind. Similarly, you could figure out, can we make new compounds and materials that sequester carbon more efficiently over longer periods, or potentially even break it down, right? So I think there's a huge opportunity for AI to be beneficial in all these ways. I think your original question was, is it equitable, across the board, or are we seeing
Mm-hmm.
disbursements? Um, I think it's so early. I mean, we
Yeah.
are in like the baby, we're not even in the crawling phase. We're in like the wiggling on the floor
Still in those
phase.
diapers, huh?
Yeah. And there's a tremendous amount of value to be created right now with AI tools as they are, without all of these future innovations that are coming. Um, and I can see that in so many ways. Like, I went to a presentation a woman was giving about how she was using computer vision to help um, defense lawyers review police tapes faster so that they could be
Wow.
better equipped. When you're representing, 10 different defendants a day, it's hard for you to watch 50 hours of police cam footage, right? And so if
Right.
you can, and so there were like all these different kinds of applications like that, where we haven't even unlocked the full potential of many of these tools just yet. And so I think what it comes down to, and for me, I'm a real techno optimist, and I'm a firm believer that we need more investment, and particularly in basic science and at the research and university level, to help unpack and solve a lot of these problems. And the first one, I think, being climate. There's a lot also to look at in terms of kind of health and health outcomes. I think we're making ourselves sick for a lot of different reasons, environmentally, diet wise, etc. And then I also think around just creating more opportunity worldwide. Like, one of my favorite examples was in the late 2000s, with smartphones coming out, a lot of countries were able to just leapfrog their payment systems to start doing mobile payments. Whereas for a long time, it was just exchanged through cash, right? And so now all of a sudden, when
Mm.
smartphones became more ubiquitous, even not even just smartphones, like cell phones, um, and the internet, then you could have much faster exchange of goods. And that became really critical in countries like in Africa and a number of other places. So I think like some of these technologies can also help leapfrog and advance a lot of economies, to be even more strong and robust than where they are right now. And we're just scratching the surface because I think we're in baby wiggle mode.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be incredible. I'm just thinking of, like Chat GPT for an example, right? It might, take you 2 hours to write an essay and it takes Chat GPT 20 seconds or something. And applying that kind of logic to, I don't know, cleaning up a beach where it might take a group of people a 12-hour day and it gets it done in 30 minutes or something. Could be I'm hoping those types of things will come from this, and I'm sure they will. I'm curious to know your perspective on, like, what do you think the maybe psychological or societal implication of humans forming emotional attachments to robots and or like AI companion type of things? Do you think we'll see a decline in human to human interaction or connection? I mean, it's been said that we're already in this huge loneliness epidemic. Do you think this could potentially worsen it, or do you think it could improve it? Maybe a mix of both, I'm assuming, but I'm curious to know like what your conversations kind of on the inside have been about that aspect.
Mm. Well, right now I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Zini. We are a journal that writes back to you. So it's
So
works with
cool.
quite a bit of large language model technology. I've had someone be like, "Oh, so like the diary in Harry Potter," and I'm like, "Yes, but less insidious." And it's, I mean, truly, the reason I founded the company was because I went through a really challenging period, around the beginning of, or the end of 2023, in my life for a whole host of reasons. And I wanted something like this, which meant that it was not explicitly an AI boyfriend or girlfriend. It was also not a therapy replacement, because therapists are real experts at what they do and it's a completely different modality. But it was a way for me to process what I was feeling in 100% private, fully encrypted environment, and get some of these prompts and activities that were reflected back to me so I could actually work my way out of it, as opposed to every time I was upset, like calling my best friend or my mom and kind of putting this emotional burden on them. I wanted to build some of my own resilience. And we find that with Zini, like the vast majority of our users are going through a different various life transitions, whether it's divorce or they're moving to a city for the first time or they're becoming a mom for the first time. And we primarily serve women. I mean, our vast majority of our user base is female because, and also that is an interesting discussion because so few of the users of AI tools are female. I think last time I checked, it was like of the top 50 AI applications, fewer than 36% of their users were female. So
Wow.
then you see this big asymmetry in men who are using this brand new technology and benefiting from it, and women are not, which leaves a lot of women behind. So that was the big impetus behind founding Zini. And I think people grow to be attached to it insofar as I was really attached to my very pretty diary when I was 10 years old. But I know that I am not in love with this journal. It is not a replacement for all of these other emotional bonds that I have in my life. Like, we're very explicit about being a way for you to leverage so many of these benefits of AI and to process what you're going through in real time. So I think there's opportunities to have AI in your life in a personal, maybe intimate being the wrong word, but like in a personal way that is not, this is a love, relationship replacement.
Right.
And it's very subtle. Like, being able to communicate that is very subtle for people. So that's just something that I've worked on personally. I think and then I also want to provide a provocation, which, so everything that I just said, I very firmly, strongly believe in. And we have a lot of these measures, as we spoke about, where loneliness is going up. People are feeling alienated from one another. Things like social media were meant to create a huge sense of connectivity and community. I think what it's actually done for Renee DiResta, who is at the Stanford Internet Observatory, is give us these bespoke kingdoms where everyone's living in their own bubble of what they're exposed to. So there are many cases where the intention behind the technology does not become the outcome.
Yeah.
And particularly around this like emotional attachment piece, there is no replacement for humans having close relationships. It is the number one predictor of health and happiness over long horizons. If you ask people who are in their 80s and 90s, like the Harvard happiness study, what's the thing that gave it? It's having high quality relationships over long periods in your life. And so we want, if I can have a robot that, if I'm 75 years old, allows me to live independently for longer in my house because I'm more empowered, that's a good thing for me. Doesn't mean I need to also be in love with that robot. So I think we can disentangle like getting many of the benefits from these tools, even in like personal home, etc. settings, and them needing to be a boyfriend, girlfriend, companion, partner, etc. And I think as builders, as makers, as communicators about the technology, like, we can also just be clear about that. Like, we don't need to lean into the ambiguity and say, well, when everyone falls in love with like their robot, whatever, like, I don't want to live in that world. And as a person who's building in that space, I can simply be explicit about that. And that might be a good starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you able to give us an example of how Zini works that could kind of give us a sneak peek into how it can impact us?
I spoke with one of our users. She said she got in a really big fight with her daughter, and she actually ran to the bathroom so she could journal about it with Zini because she was so upset. And it gave her a couple pieces of advice, not only about how she could calm down in the moment, but how she could more constructively take the conversation with her daughter forward so that they would work their way out of a conflict. I thought that was a really beautiful one. I think for me, I've found if I'm really ruminating about something, kind of spiraling about it over and over and over, I like to be able to journal about it because it also helps me work through that instead of ignoring it. So being avoidant and like, oh, this isn't a big deal for me, bury, is different than saying like, this is something that I'm feeling insecure about. These are all the different reasons why. And then Zini can find patterns and say, hey, like, I also noticed that you said you were feeling insecure about something similar a couple of weeks ago. Is this something that you could reframe and feel differently about? So I've, and then I also think it's not only, you don't need to journal only about when you're upset. I think for me, I have wins that show up in my life, right? Like I've worked really hard at something. I tell my family, I tell my friends, I'm proud of it. And I also don't want to be braggadocious. Like I don't want to be thumping my chest all the time, but like being able to write it down in my journal and say, this is what I did that I'm really proud of. And these are the things that I'm going to repeat. Um, it's just a beautiful record of some of the highs and lows. And then also a way for you to gain some of the expertise and benefit through a variety of these AI systems in service of, your goals outside of the computer. And then we just added a bunch of things where you can get statistics about what you're journaling about most frequently. Maybe it's about your job, maybe you're journaling about your fitness. And if you say that something's really important to you, like your family and relationships, but you never journal about it, it's kind of like, why is that? And you can also journal with Zini and a friend. So you could journal with Zini and your mom or Zini and your partner. And the two of you can have a conversation where you're also getting some closeness leverage through the use of the AI. So I think we're seeing like so many different kinds of people. And honestly, for me as a builder, a maker, an engineer, an artist, like it is an absolute thrill to hear from people that their lives are meaningfully better by using a tool like this. And we work so hard to build something that is like private, safe, and also just sort of like authentic and inspiring, where you don't have to look at a bunch of ads. You don't have to go down this like weird deep spiral hole. And that for me is like a moral imperative just as much as it is a company one.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're able to draw from a few different sources because people journal, but we also have quizzes inside of the app. So you can, if you're feeling a little bit stuck, you can take a quiz and that will give you some feedback. And, we hear from people who are going through breakups, like I mentioned, or they're navigating a new job. Like these are big events that come up in your life and you want to be able to navigate them and grow through them. And I think that's where Zini is totally, and we have a really amazing, thriving community all over social media too, who are also hilarious and just like chime in with each other. And I love being able to build something like that around technology too, that it's both the platform of what you get to experience directly through the app on your phone and the community that you take part in with a variety of other people.
What a cool concept that this like AI tool is actually bringing humans together. It's strengthening human interaction. If you could snap your fingers and everything goes right with AI and robotics and all of that, what kind of world would we be living in? Like, what kind of advancements are you envisioning and hoping for?
We have some big, existential challenges that are coming up. Climate change is a huge one, and being able to do a clean energy transition, and also huge, economic inequality in the US. We have, and it's just gotten worse. I grew up, my parents certainly in an era where being middle class was a real thing, and that is becoming rarer and rarer and fewer and farther between. I think we're living in too many silos. People have access to different kinds of information. We don't have an idea of what a shared truth is. And I think some of this also boils down to our relationships with other countries and wanting to continue to have great relationships with our allies and support one another and reduce the amount of conflict that's happening on a global scale. And so there are so many problems that are ripe for the application of AI and robotics, which again, I see as an opportunity to innovate our way through many of these big challenges that we're facing. So on top of kind of solving all the problems, what does the world look like next? For me, I think we have the chance to not only be a society of people who can love our families, put food on the table, have housing, have health insurance. We can also be a society that gets to have fun and be inspired. We get to use our tools to feel creative, to play. I mean, to feel creative and to feel creative with each other. Like one thing I always quote is, every early human society shows evidence of dancing, literally every single one. Because if you can dance together, you can coordinate humans in large groups to do all kinds of things, whether that's hunting or wars or celebrating your crops. And so, what is fundamental to the human experience is all those things that I just talked about, which I would broadly say are safety, kind of like housing, food on the table, close relationships with your family, right to a long health span. And it's what humans have always been doing, which is coming together, celebrating, feeling creative, telling stories. We put our hands on caves, we made paintings with animals, we created beautiful adorned costumes and jewelry, we played music, we did like those are just as much the things that make us human as this protection of our kind of fundamental safety level needs. And so what does that world look like in our future where we've solved many of these grand challenges? It's also a beautiful place of abundance where we get to have fun. And for me, building robots that make music, using AI to empower people to become their better selves, that it's not just like problem solving, it's also having fun and being inspired. So yes, you want to spend a lot of your time feeling safe, having a great place to live, having food on the table, having a close family, and you want to spend at least a healthy chunk of your life exploring nature,
Right.
laughing with your friends, dancing when you're sad, seeing music that gives you a sense of enthusiasm and love, and like bringing your spirit to this higher place. And so we need both. And I think AI and robots have a huge part to play in all of the above.
If you're envisioning that a lot of your tasks are taken care of, maybe there's jobs that are taken care of. What does that mean for us? Maybe we get to do more fun shit, like you said. We get to enjoy our day and be more present and maybe work less.
Yeah.
What would a practical application look like of the information that you shared about your dad in the hospital, the scary machines, that kind of thing? What would you think would be really cool to see a machine be able to do or AI be able to do in a hospital setting like that for somebody?
One thing for my dad would have been, I mean, honestly, changing some of those sounds to
Yeah.
be beautiful sounds instead of these glary, scary beeps. Um, I also think another one would have been, honestly, there's a fair amount of research that being surrounded by naturalistic elements and being in beautiful, simple, clean spaces is better for our well-being. Humans spend 90% of our time indoors. Having my dad be in a setting, this might seem completely out there, but if he was in a hospital room where the machines themselves and the space that he was in looked like a beautiful space,
Yeah.
it would have been better for his health. I mean, genuinely.
Right.
Um, and then I think part of being in the hospital is you feel really alone and you're really freaked out. And robots have the potential to be conversational, to speak and give you answers if you want to know something right away. And also just to provide small inclinations that give a sense of friendliness and calm.
Mm.
And I think that would have provided such a different experience for him.
So cool to think about. Well, Dr. Catie, this was fascinating. If there's anything that we didn't cover that you think is important for people to know, please share. And then where can we find you, your work, Zini, all that good stuff?
Awesome. You can find us at www.zini.ai. We are available in the Play Store and the App Store. You can find us on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all the above, Zini app. You can catch up with me. I'm on Instagram primarily, and my handle is literally it's Catie. So that's
Simple
where
enough.
you can find me on social media. And I always love being able to chat and hear from people and learn what they think, not only about Zini or any of the projects that I'm working on, but about AI and robots in general. And then I'm currently the artist in residence at the Exploratorium. So if you find yourself in San Francisco in the very near future, you're welcome to see a project that I've been working on there called Manifold. It is a 9-foot-high robot hand that uses AI to learn how to be endearing to the audience. So it uses AI to learn how to be friendly, basically.
Oh my
and
gosh.
we'd love for you to come see it.
Thanks for hanging out with Self-Helpless. Feel free to share this with someone who could use it, and you can binge related conversations linked in the show notes. Ad-free episodes are now available on Patreon, and because I'm practically allergic to social media, the best way to get notified about new episodes is to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or join the email list at selfhelplesspodcast.com, where you will also find some free goodies like a watch and read list and the quote buffet. All right, love you big time, and thank you so much.